So then I went to see a specialist. And then that appointment, the energy changed.
Hi, you're listening to The Rare Life. I'm your host, Madeline Cheney, and today we have the story of Cali with mom, Falesha Johnson. Cali is an 18-month-old baby with a rare genetic disorder called Pfeiffer Syndrome. In this episode, Falesha shares her story of finding out about her daughter's physical abnormalities via ultrasound a few weeks before delivering her, and the power she has found in becoming an expert on Cali's diagnosis. Falesha is awesome. So when I found her on Instagram, which you can do too with a link in the show notes, I could just tell that we would hit it off. And I was happily correct in that assumption. She is so easy to talk to, and I had a lot of fun recording with her. Falesha, her husband Rome, and Cali live in Seattle, Washington. Woot, woot, Washington. For those of you who don't know, I grew up there. She attended University of Washington as a track athlete and is now a fundraiser for the school, as well as a trainer for young athletes and an avid video blogger sharing their life with Cali. And I'll put links for that and her social media in the show notes. Falesha is a lover of books and working out. All right, let's jump in. Hi, Falesha. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. I'm super excited to chat about you and Cali and kind of, your relationship and, life. So to start out, I would love for you to give us a snapshot of Cali and kind of, where she is medically and just as a person.
Yes. Oh, she's come so far. So Callie has Pfeiffer syndrome, and the easiest way to explain it is that the sutures in her skull fused early. Like your baby is born, they have soft spots, and Callie didn't have too many, and that's because her skull fused. And so with that, you have complications in the bone structure. So she's got more protruding eyes. She's got a very narrow nasal and throat. So she has a trach. If you think
Mm.
about your throat being very small, she can't eat like we do. So she has a G
Mm.
tube. If you think about your nasal airway being very small, you have a hard time breathing. So she has a vent. And so she came home with a handful of machines and a trach, a vent, a G tube, and now she is just thriving. She's on the move. It's just been amazing to see her journey of where we started to where we are now. And
Mm.
oh my goodness, if I could have told myself from day one, like everything is going to be okay. Like it's
Mm.
going to be hard, but you're going to get through it. You have all the tools in you to survive and to make it as a medical mom. I would have just been able to breathe, but
Mm.
those first handful of months they were hard.
That resonates so much. I totally agree. It's like if only you could show yourself a glimpse of like what life is like once you adjust and what your child is like when they're thriving. And, it's just, it would be so helpful. Unfortunately, we can't do that, but that would be so
Yeah.
cool.
And I feel like people try to tell me like, you're
Uh-huh.
strong, you got this. And in that moment, I was like, I don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
Like, this is a lot for me. Like, I want to feel the emotions I'm feeling right now. But to
Yes.
see, like you said, like a snapshot of it, to see us home and like enjoying things that your typical kid would enjoy, I definitely would have been like, okay, I just have to get to that point. I have to just keep
Yes.
grinding and just keep pouring love and attention into her, and we will get there on her own timeline. And that's something I've definitely
Mm.
learned is like our kiddos, they are resilient, but they do things on their own timeline. And it's made me have to like remove myself from what other kids are doing that aren't going through what she's going through. I compared
Yes.
everything so much. And it's like, oh well, this kid has Pfeiffer syndrome too, and they're walking and talking,
Mm.
but her story's different, and that's totally fine.
Yes. Yes. I totally agree. I think that is something that all of us parents need to come to terms with at one point or another. And the sooner we do, the better things go. Just, slowing down. I think with a lot of like the testing and things, I don't know if Callie's in like early intervention and,
She
therapy.
is.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I feel like even things like that kind of like it makes you feel like that's your job as a parent is to get them to those milestones. Like, hurry, hurry, hurry. What are they not doing? What do they need to do? And it's like, we just need to relax and enjoy them, like you say.
Yeah, no, so true. It's like you put together these goals and like we had
Mhm.
goals to have her just sit up. And that was one of our big goals. And I wanted to happen as soon as possible, you know? So I'm doing
Mhm.
all the steps and it took her until about 11 months, 10,
Mm.
11 months to sit up on her own. And you see these little sheets of what kids are hitting each month, and it's like, oh, kids are sitting up by 6 months. And to me it was like,
Mhm.
okay, well, they don't, there's a little asterisk where it's like, well, these kids are going through this. So I
Mhm.
definitely feel like, early intervention has been great for us, but it's made me have to like slow down and enjoy the little moment. So we definitely celebrate small wins.
Mhm.
She sat up for 5 seconds. That's amazing, you know?
Yeah.
30 seconds. Yes. So she's
Yeah.
taught me so much. I don't know if that's been for you too, but I'm a
Mhm.
totally different person than I was before I had her.
Yes. Yeah, I would love to get into that. So you say that you celebrate the smaller milestones that maybe we would overlook, if they were typically developing or didn't have all these hurdles to overcome. What are some other ways that you feel like you've changed because of her?
My strength has changed. I thought I was strong before, and to
Mm,
go through having your child go through surgeries and
mm.
to battle through them, and I'm like, wow, she's so resilient, she is strong, like
Mhm,
I'm just like advocate for her and her cheerleader. And to see her overcome so many obstacles, it makes me kind of sit back and think some of these things that maybe I'm stressing out about don't matter as much.
mm,
Seeing her thrive is what matters to me. And so I definitely realize how strong we are. Like prioritizing what's important is
mm,
key, and realizing like that it's not how quick she's doing something. It's just a matter of fact that she's like overcoming some of these obstacles that maybe we didn't think she would before.
mhm,
I've slowed down quite a bit, and just definitely dropped other like passions I thought were of mine off, and like my passion has redirected. When you become a medical
mm,
mom, you start to realize the support system out there is not as strong as you would like it to be. The image out there, like you don't see a lot of women of color out there of
mm,
parents with Pfeiffer syndrome. And that was one thing we noticed is as we found out she had Pfeiffer syndrome, we're looking up on Instagram and social media, and we didn't see a lot of representation of families that looked like us. And so we
mm,
wanted to share our story. And through sharing
mhm,
our story, we've seen other parents reach out to us and say, wow, like I want to share my story too. There's a different
mm,
culture when it comes to like talking and sharing your kid, and understanding that they could be inspiring others. And so
mm.
that's definitely like a passion shift of mine
Yeah.
of I was so focused on like I do fitness training on the side. I still do a little bit of it, but now I'm really into, thinking about advocating for other families who have kids with medical needs, and my YouTube channel sharing like our nurse's story, what's home health look like, and those
Mhm.
different ways that other parents can like lean into and realize it's going to be okay. Like seeing where we are year and a half later, if I would have saw my channel or my page, I'd be like, oh wow, okay, I can do this.
Right. Yeah, I think that's so cool, and to look at it as a need that you had, like, I'm gonna fulfill that for someone else. And even when you
Yeah.
talk about seeing other families that looked like yours, like, you didn't see other families of color, and so that probably would be just harder to really see yourself in them, right? So, like, to be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, here's your snapshot of the future," be like, "But I just can't quite relate as much." And so I'm sure that, that's probably been really helpful for a lot of people. And I also wonder, so I think that pretty much all of us struggle with this, at least to some degree, or have dealt with this to some degree. But with Callie and with other children with Pfeiffer syndrome, and where a lot of facial features are very different than what you see in typical children, how
Mhm.
has, like, do you feel like your perception of beauty has changed, or like judging other people by how they look? How has that evolved for you?
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like it's harder when it's like your child and you want to protect them from everything. And Callie coming into this world in the pandemic, I feel like it kind of slowed down the process of us having to deal with the reality of the facial difference and like what people would
Mm,
say. And so we shared her on social media in our story. One, because we wanted to also really kind of speak about facial equality and
mm,
get that out there and build that confidence in her by seeing that we are carrying on. Like we are proud that you are our daughter. We are going to show
yes.
pictures rather than shielding her and not showing her off. So we show
Mm,
her off proudly. And I feel like that's one part of it for other families to see, like, wow, like we are proud. And then
mm,
as you were saying and understanding that, different doesn't make it worse or bad. And I
right.
feel like sometimes we do think that, like, oh, that individual looks different from us. They're not equal to us. And it's like there's so many differences that we all have, from skin
Mm,
color to ethnicity to religion. It just goes on and on. And that's just
mm,
one bucket that she has, but to wear it proudly. So we definitely like, as now the world is opening up
mhm,
and we're around more people, we are getting some stares.
mm,
And it was hard at first. Um, and then I had to slow down and think that people just aren't educated about it. They're
mm,
looking and like they're not really aware of Pfeiffer syndrome. It's 1 in 100,000 individuals or kiddos that are born with it. So it's a very rare
mm.
genetic disorder. And people are kind of like looking like, okay, well, then also her machines, like we suction her
Yeah.
and it's really loud and there's a trach. And then sometimes we feed her in public. And what's that? And so there's just so much going
Mm,
on that I think people are watching and taking it all in rather than staring like, ooh, what is that? And so having to
mm,
change that narrative, and my husband and I have just been so vocal about it and trying to like raise that awareness for her. And I've talked to
mm.
other parents and they have shared that, as they get older, it does get hard. Kids can be kind of hard on each other. And
Yeah.
so right now she's totally clueless to everything going on. But there will become a time when, she's on the playground and someone might say, like, why do your eyes look that? Why? And for us, it's like we're trying to show her the example of when people ask us that, like to ask us with respect and kind of change that question and say, like, what happened to her? It's like,
Mm,
what is she going through? And to
mhm.
educate them in that response.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I think this is something that pretty much all of us are either in the middle of, as you say, when they're older and when they notice, right? When they notice
Mhm.
that other people might be staring at them or asking them these questions. So we're either like in that mode or like you and me, we're kind of bracing ourselves for that because, my son's
Right.
3. And so he doesn't really understand that yet. And it's this like, oh my gosh, I love my child so much, and the world cannot perceive how wonderful they are as a parent can. And,
Mhm.
that's pretty scary.
It is, and we get people reaching out to us like, "Why would you do that to your child?" as far as share her, and I'm just
Oh,
like, "Oh, that right there." I'm just like, "Why would you say that?" But
yeah.
I feel like we are teaching our friends and people out there to share her story, to be educated on her syndrome. So if they were to see someone with Pfeiffer syndrome out there, they'd be aware of what it is and to treat
Mm,
them with respect and be just thoughtful in their approach. But my
mm,
husband and I, we think about that often, of like the years coming up of bracing ourselves for that. And
mm.
my husband has autoimmune disease, but it's invisible, And so
Right.
the difference of having something going on with yourself that's invisible versus something that's very visible,
Mm,
and the difference for that of how people treat you. And unfortunately, kids and people who see Callie, sometimes they think that she's incapable of doing a lot of things because of
mm,
how she looks. And when they see her moving and walking in her gait trainer and eating, and they're like, wow. And I've had people reach out to me like, wow, like I have to explain to you that when I first saw her, I felt sad. I thought, what kind of quality of life she's going to have. And as
mm,
I fell in love with your channel and started watching more and more, I was in awe of all the things she can do. And
mm,
I hate that I even thought that I even thought that because of how she looked, I thought she couldn't do standard things. And people ask, will she ever talk? Will she ever walk? And
mm,
now they're seeing her do some of those things. Like, oh my goodness, like thank you for
mm,
sharing that story, because I'm seeing that she's a living testimony and to never count someone out with a disability.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, a lot of that is internalized ableism that even I think us as parents kind of go into the parenting experience with, right? Like
Right.
a lot of us, I think we get these diagnoses either when we're pregnant or afterwards. And then we're like, kind of like those people, like, what kind of quality of life is that? Will my child be happy? Will they thrive? Because, in our experience, my life looked like this, and this, not like my
Mhm.
child's life is going to look like. And I was happy. Will they, so I think it's just, it's kind of how our culture and our society has been trained to think.
Right.
But seeing these kids and seeing how happy they are and or unhappy, right? Just human, how human they are,
Yes,
I
how
think
human
is
they are.
so important. And I wonder what that was like for you. You mentioned earlier that you found out about, I don't know if you found out about her syndrome, but that she had medical issues just before you delivered her at like 37 weeks. What was
Yes.
that like?
Oh, like I go back and forth of like, was it a pro, was it a con? So I found out, I went in for like my 36-week checkup. And in that checkup, we were just going to see how much she weighed, what her position was, and everything was going smooth up until that point. Like, passed the glucose test. I was gaining weight. It was a little more than what the doctor expected, but I was still working out. And they
Mm.
saw that I had a lot of amniotic fluid still. They're like, okay, well, you're about 4 weeks to being due. It should be dropping off. I think, the number was 28, and they were like, you should be in the 10 to 12. And I'm like,
Oh,
whoa,
wow.
I'm a lot more. So then I went to see a specialist. And then that appointment, the energy changed. Every appointment I had, it was like, oh, look at her face and look at her feet. And she was so
Mm.
quiet.
Mm.
She was like taking pictures, and she was just looking at her anatomy. And then the actual like specialist, the perneologist, was going to come in and explain to me what they saw. And she was super quiet. And I didn't know what I was looking on the screen. And then she
Mm.
left the room and she was gone for about 20 minutes.
Ugh.
Yeah. And I was like, this doesn't feel right. And then the doctor came
Mm.
in, and she started to like redo everything, like doing the ultrasound again, and ask me odd questions like, do you feel like you're a little heavier than you should be? And how have you been feeling? And I'm just kind of like, get to the point, like, tell me everything looks good. And my OBGYN had said, like, oh, there's 3 different buckets. It could be really serious, it could be just nothing, or you could just be someone who just happens to have more fluid, and that's just standard. I'm like, okay. So I
Mm.
thought I was going to be in the other bucket, I'll be fine. And then she started saying like, well, I see an opening in her spine, and I see fluid on her brain. And I'm just like,
Oh
what
my
does all
gosh.
this mean? And she actually thought she had spina bifida,
Mm.
and which means like, pretty much it's like a paralyzation of the legs. And I thought that was wrong because she was kicking and moving so
You're like,
much.
those legs work.
Exactly. I was just like, that's odd. And then she was like,
Mm.
wait, no, that looks just like a little dimple. She was just spewing out everything in her head, and she wasn't taking the time to think through like how she was presenting this. And it was
Mm.
the worst experience I've ever had with a doctor. She mentioned that her eyes looked a little big and looked a little closer together, and then she looked at my husband and looked at me, and she goes, oh, don't worry, if I look at you guys, sometimes it's just genetic. And so I'm looking to see if one of you got. And we were like, wait, did you just
What?
say that one of us have? Wait, my husband's like, what does that mean? And she goes, you would be the one to ask me that.
Oh my
It was
gosh.
so offensive, and I left like in tears. She said that I feel like you should have a C-section, and didn't give us any like actual answers.
Oh my
So I was
gosh.
just like, what just happened? And I had an appointment the next day. And I went into that appointment with my OB, and when I walked in, she's like, can I give you a hug? And I thought, what? Like, what does this mean? Like, she's very chill, like she never super emotional. And I just broke down because I knew that she was going to tell me some bad news or just news in general. And that's when she
Mm.
told me, like, I see craniosynostosis, which means like abnormal head shape, fusion of like more than one of her plates in her skull. Um,
Mm.
and fluid on her brain. And I just was just sitting there, and she's like, I think she might have one of those syndromes like Pfeiffer Syndrome. And all this was so new to me. And she kind of thought she was giving me an update from what I was told the day before. But that
Oh.
doctor didn't tell me any of those things. She let
Mm.
the OB tell me everything. So she didn't realize that she was breaking news to me. So I'm hearing
Mm,
this, like, what does that mean? And so I got a second opinion. So that's one thing I advise everybody. If you were in a
mm,
situation with a doctor and you don't feel comfortable, I should have left. When she
mm,
insulted us, I should have got up and left. When she
mm.
just didn't handle us professionally, and to find out that she like withheld certain information from me and didn't tell me when I came to her to see a specialist. So I got a second opinion. And in that appointment, they handled me with respect. They
Mm.
walked down everything and they said, we see these three different things. And because we see all of them together, we are like 90% sure that she has Pfeiffer syndrome. I'm like, okay.
Mm.
They gave me a genetic testing, explained to me kind of the process of it. They also
Mm.
told me that she'll probably have multiple surgeries in her first year of life. They prepped me for it. They
Mm.
said, you can have a vaginal delivery. You do not need to have a C-section. I'm like, oh, wow. Like they just educated me so
Wow.
much. And I'm so thankful that I went to that new hospital. So within like a week, I changed hospitals. I left that other hospital. I said,
Wow.
no,
Yeah.
not delivering with you guys.
Mm.
Changed hospitals. They told me there's a great chance that she'll have a hard time breathing when she is delivered. So we need to have a neonatal team right there. You probably are going to not have the typical experience where your child's born and then they get to have skin to skin.
Mm.
She's probably going to be at a point where we're going to have to figure out next steps on how to help her breathe. And
Mm.
so they asked us, like, if there's a situation where we are having a difficulty, do you want us to proceed? Like what are the
Wow.
and we were like, I'm like due in 2 weeks. There was so much
Mm.
emotion that I felt like I didn't have any time to process anything. It was
Right.
happening so fast. And looking back, I'm like, oh my goodness, like that was so much built up emotion, but I was so focused on how do I get her to this world as safely as possible and just do my
Mm.
job. And I felt like she could feel everything I was feeling. So if I was
Mm.
overly sad, then that was going to impact her. So I try to keep my
Mm.
spirits up and I ended up having her vaginal delivery. She came out, she had a handful of soft spots. And that's one like the
Mm.
miracles for her is that her head fused in my womb and her brain wanted to grow so bad that multiple of them opened up.
Oh, wow.
And so I was able to have her vaginal delivery. She came into this world. She did have a hard time breathing, and we had to intubate her right away. And she was like off to the NICU, went to a different
Mm.
hospital. And I think once I delivered her, then it was like all the emotions hit me, kind of like
Wow.
what our world was going to be like. I think we were still holding on to maybe it will be a mild case of Pfeiffer syndrome. Maybe she won't need a trach. Maybe she can come home like within a couple of days. And we kept
Mhm.
asking everyone at the NICU, like, when do you think we can go home? Like, how long do you think we'll be here? And they
Mm.
they said for a while. And I was like, what does that
Mm.
mean? You're gonna be here for a while. I was like, okay, let me get prepared for that. So I feel like our
Mm.
whole early journey was just this unknown. It
Yeah.
just hit me hard. And at 37 weeks, like, officially knowing that she had Pfeiffer syndrome and kind of thinking all the way up to that, you're going to have one type of birth plan and one type of pregnancy. And then to quickly to switch to be high risk and have to be flexible with that.
Mm.
That was a lot of emotion, a lot of change in such a short period of time for us.
Yeah. Yeah, that must have been so much to take in, and I imagine that that really rude doctor, I mean, like, the timing of that, right? When you're getting this news and not really getting news because it's just that there's something wrong, but, I'm not gonna really tell you what, or I'm gonna guess a ton of different things. I bet that just exasperated all those scary emotions, and what a relief to get someone who actually knew what they were doing and were respectful about it, and,
Yes,
I'm sure there were so many emotions during that time.
there was. And I think that was my first time of like learning how to advocate for my
Mm.
daughter and myself in a
Mhm.
healthcare setting.
Yeah.
And that was new. And I've continued to have those kind of situations, not rude doctors like her, but having to say, no, something's up. Something feels
Mhm.
off. And in that situation, like I took some time and focused on Kalia. And then once she was born and once we kind of got home, I filed a complaint. And I'm kind of in that process of like letting them know how you
Mhm.
treated us in that process. You could have handled it so much better if I would have stuck with that hospital, I wouldn't have known her syndrome. I wouldn't have been mentally prepared going into my delivery.
Yeah.
Like there's just so many things that in hindsight, I'm just like, wow, like you guys really failed me. And I
Mhm.
know there's other moms out there that have had similar situations and other kiddos with Pfeiffer syndrome. It's kind of like all about like the ultrasound, the head shape. But
Mhm.
I know moms that found at 20 weeks and carried that for the last 20 weeks of this unknown and the anxiety. And they said they could not enjoy their pregnancy. It was
Mhm.
so much sadness and kind of like anxiety of what's going to happen. And then you go to Google, you go online and you look up,
Yeah.
and it's just the worst. I had my doctor from day one. He said, please don't look this up. I said, wait, what? Like, don't look it up.
Did
And
you
I
do
was like,
it?
I did. I
Okay, I was like,
did.
how would you not? Like, like,
I
no parent can do
did.
that.
And he's just like, you're going to see all of the worst case scenarios. And here's another miracle in itself. So we're located in Seattle. And
Mm.
Seattle is one of the top hospitals for craniofacial syndromes.
Wow.
Yes, they see about 150 kiddos a year. And some
Wow.
of your other hospitals see about 3 to 5.
Oh my
So
goodness.
like it's like them and 4 other units that are top in the country. And for us to be 40 minutes away from there and to have that type of care, it was just phenomenal for us. Like
Mm.
we knew we were in the right place. But what he shared is that there's been so much research and so much done over the last like 2 to 3 years that what you see out there is pretty outdated. And
Mm.
sometimes what makes it to the articles they post and things on Wikipedia, everything like that, it doesn't get updated as often. And so
Mm.
he was trying to explain to us like you're in the right place. We're going to take care of her,
Mhm.
and they do things very proactively. And so kids have a hard time developing mentally and cognitively because the pressure that's put on their brain because their
Oh.
brain is continuing to grow, and I think it's 80% grown until like you're 2. So
Oh
it's
wow.
continuing to grow, but your skull is fused. So your skull's not growing.
Oh my goodness.
So it's putting pressure while your brain's going this way. And so what they do is they get in front of it. And so they open up, they do craniectomies till it's almost like a bottle, like you pop the open of the bottle, like, and it breathes. And
Mm.
so your skull can regenerate the bone over time.
Wow.
The goal is for her brain to grow at a faster rate than the bone is growing back. So
Mm.
it's opening up and then the bone is regenerating. And that gives
Wow.
her, centimeters of space. And then we do that again.
Oh my
And you keep doing
goodness.
it until about 2 when the skull is pretty much kind of the size it's going to be. And so is your brain to stop growing. So I've learned this
Wow.
process, but our hospital is like, we get in front of it. We do it weeks or months and we
Mm.
react to the child rather than be on this timeline. So you saw some pretty
Wow.
poor prognosis to certain syndromes because they were so stuck on, we do it at 6 months, but at 6 months, you can't reverse some of the damage that's been done on a brain. If it wants to grow and be
Mhm.
healthy, it needs the space.
Yeah.
Pressure is going to default, is going to go backwards. So,
Wow. Wow. So, I mean, you have some really good advice in there when you said to get second opinions. And
mm,
even, if someone's listening right now and thinking, well, my child has craniofacial differences, maybe I should get a second opinion at Seattle Children's Hospital. Like, I'm kind of thinking that right now because my son does. So, I guess to wrap up, what advice would you have if you picture parents listening right now, maybe earlier in their journey or maybe further along? What's your number one piece of advice?
yeah. My advice for new parents, just hearing that news, would definitely be like, take a deep breath. Like, I leaned on my partner, me and my husband, we had this conversation of, we are in this together
Mm.
and we are going to do whatever it takes to get our child here safely and to the next stage. And
Mhm.
so we researched, and I know they say like don't Google, but we wanted to
Mhm.
be as educated as possible about everything coming up. We took notes from the doctors, and if they were saying one thing, we're like taking notes and then following back up. Like you said X, Y, and Z, and if
Mhm.
we didn't feel comfortable with a doctor, we spoke up and said, we're going to go this direction,
Mhm.
because you can do that. And we had to learn that the hard way. You can advocate and you can switch doctors if you don't feel comfortable, but definitely get a second opinion and
Mhm.
find the specialty. Like if you can, going to somewhere that they have hands-on and high experience in your child's syndrome is going to be the best for their future. So
Mm.
definitely, find those doctors that are experts in that syndrome. Talk to your partner about like your plan together, because hearing that news does something to your emotional, and you need to have that support, that strong support, whether that be family or your husband or wife. And then
Mm.
being as educated as you can. And if your doctor says don't Google it, ask what's the best piece of education out there that I can learn from. And so our doctors
Mm.
had articles and research articles. Here, do this. Don't read
Mm.
Wikipedia. Read this source. And so
Right.
that's what I asked him. I was like, okay, if you don't want me to go online, where? And he gave me a stack of papers, and I read
Mm.
through them, and I was like, oh, okay. I feel like I have a good picture, a good whole picture of the future. And so that prepped me for the weeks and months to come for her different surgeries.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. Because I think that I guess so many parents I talk to, especially on here, when they're telling their story, they say the doctor said don't Google it. And I went
Yeah.
home and Googled it and I got freaked out. And it's like, I love that where it's like, okay, if you're gonna tell me not to Google it, then I need to know what's going to happen. So you need to tell me where to look to. And I can't, I just keep thinking too, when you're talking about the outdated research or, the scary things on Google or even these research papers, I keep thinking if a family gets a diagnosis of Pfeiffer syndrome, uh, I mean, like, obviously it's good to know the medical stuff, but to kind of have an idea of what your life's going to be like your Instagram account and your YouTube channel, like things like that of
Yes.
being able to find other parents that are in the trenches dealing with it can be so helpful right along with the medical research if there is any on your child's syndrome. Like it's so valuable. So I'm sure that has been just such a motivator for you.
It is. It is. That's what my husband did. I feel like we are such a great team where I needed to read everything. I read everything. And my husband was like, I can't read
Mm.
everything. I need to see the families. So he went on Instagram and found families and connected from like day 3 of knowing that she was going to have Pfeiffer syndrome. And
Oh,
they still
wow.
have been in our lives. And they have been so amazing because there have been different points on our journey where maybe she had a surgery and she responded poorly to it. And our doctors were telling us, no, that's standard. That's just what happens. And their families were saying, no, that's not
Mm.
okay. That didn't happen to ours. Not saying it can't happen to yours, but hey, don't let them tell you that this is the typical trajectory. And
Oh,
we're like, oh,
wow.
wow. So they helped us get that confidence of like, nope, we're going to
Mhm.
go back and question, like, let's go through the line. Something's going on.
Mhm.
So it was nice to have that duel of like, he is the art side and I'm the science side.
I love
And
that.
together I was like, okay, Rome, this is what this means. And he's like, okay, but I seen it in real life. This is what this means. And so,
Mhm. That
yeah.
is so awesome. What an awesome team you guys are. And
Thank you.
I just love, picturing you and Callie and Rome like all together, just navigating this and figuring it out and helping other families. And you guys are just awesome. So thank you so much for sharing your story and, your experience with us. It's been so valuable.
Thank you just for having me, just giving me a platform to share my story. I appreciate it.
You're so welcome. You can head to the website, therarelifepodcast.com, to see adorable photos of Falesha and her family and to answer this month's question. There will be a link for the website in the show notes. And you can also find links to find her and me on social media. Join us next week for Falesha's special topic episode, all about living life with a machine-dependent child. She has some really great stuff in there, and I enjoyed that conversation even more than this last one. So don't miss it. See you then.